Hello, Christ Church, and any visitors we have joining us for this, our adult forum for August, God and the Pandemic, a Christian reflection on the coronavirus and its aftermath by Bishop NT Wright. We will cover chapter 1 today, but we'll also be covering some of the preface because I found that from the start, from the first page, which is praise from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, that it was already rich in content. As the Archbishop says, this is classic NT Wright. So taking a look today at chapter 1 and at chapter 1 in the workbook. The second thing I noticed in the book was the dedication page, that this was dedicated in memory of Simon Barrington Ward, a wise and gentle saint and the former Bishop of Coventry from 1985 to 1997. Bishop Barrington Ward died of COVID-19 complications on Holy Saturday, the day we know as the day for the Easter Vigil, the day before Easter Sunday itself. For me, this makes the book real. It adds flesh and blood to these writings of Tom Wright's. Bishop Wright knows someone who has died from this virus. This is not an abstract book talking about various things in theology. Rather, this is about earthly life and death and how we as Christians respond to it. And an endorsement of my own for N.T. Wright, I admit that I am a huge admirer of his work. His work in Scripture and theology is excellent, and it's so excellent that he has published over 80 books during his time as a scholar. That doesn't count the scholarly articles that he's written. When we moved to the preface and the acknowledgments, I was surprised to find that this book started out as an article. It was an article in Time magazine, which I didn't realize. And in that article, in that reflection, Bishop Wright brought up a lot of good points. He said that for us, including himself, that this lockdown has produced a lot of emotions. He also said it's important to keep our reactions to the current crisis within a biblical limit. And we're going to explore more what that means in the later chapters. He says also that he's not offering a solution. Bishop Wright is not saying that this book is the end-all be-all and will help us end the pandemic. Rather, it's a Christian reflection and a Christian vision for how we continue even in the midst of something as dangerous as COVID-19 in our world. Wright is offering a catalyst for us to move to Christian action. He asks a good question in the preface. He says, how do we resist knee-jerk reactions? Think about all the things that occur in our lives, whether there's a pandemic or there's not a pandemic, to which we have a knee-jerk reaction, and how quickly that knee-jerk reaction, that knee-jerk thought can become a type of action or words that wind up getting us in some kind of trouble, hurting relationships, even leading us into sin. he also says that this is a time to offer prayers of lament. Lament is a type of the psalm, probably the most famous one being Psalm 22, verse 1. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Which we hear Jesus say from the cross. Wright says this, unless we retreat from our instant reactions, we may not be able to hear the still small voice of God. Moving on to chapter 1, where do we start? It's a great question because the pandemic and everything around it is so overwhelming that it can paralyze us. He quotes the famous pastor Martin Niemöller from the 1930s. And Wright is correct. I think that we have abandoned a sense of global responsibility. I don't mean that as a political statement. I mean that as a commentary on our culture, and I think Wright does too. Remember that Wright is British. He is the former Bishop of Durham, which is in the Church of England. So this is not a critique of the United States alone. It's a critique of the world. Or as he points out, at least what's left of it. For me personally, the coronavirus did not become real until it ravaged through Italy, where my cousin was and is stationed with her husband at an Air Force base. I had a connection, a human connection to this disease. The virus, as Wright says, presents no neutral zone. It is everywhere. There is almost nowhere that we can go that has not been affected by this virus except maybe Antarctica. Wright then changes a bit into philosophy. I did not expect to go to, in chapter 1 at least, a review of Freshman Philosophy 101 survey course. But he gives us the three main types of philosophy, and I'm limiting the world of philosophy a lot there. But first you have Stoicism, which basically means you think you can't change it, just fit in. Secondly, you have the Epicureanism, which says that everything is at random. It's almost chaos theory. And we can't do anything about it, but we can make ourselves comfortable. We often comfort ourselves with the words, "This too shall pass." And then there are the Platonists, that this present life is just a shadow reality, and we are headed for far better things. Wright contends that most of the Western civilization is Epicurean, which I agree with. Even though myself, I find myself more of a Stoic, if I'm being honest. We are Epicureans in the sense that we want to feel that we can survive anything, that we can overcome anything. The idea that this too shall pass. But as Wright points out, for us, this too shall pass as long as Netflix keeps working. Let's be sensible. Let's do the proper protocols, but don't shut down the churches or the golf clubs or the yacht clubs. Wright then shifts to our own Christian heritage. It was Christians who truly lived out a understanding of a responsibility to community. Developing hospitals, sometimes serving others, cost early Christian their lives. For instance, in the Black Death, the bubonic plague, and all other several other epidemics that have gone on through history. The modern version of this is our frontliners, even doctors and nurses who have come out of retirement to fight the virus. And some have died for their good deeds, and we give thanks for their sacrifice. Back to the early Christians, it's no wonder that Christianity thrived and spread. These people were willing to die for their beliefs. Die for their beliefs. As the saying goes, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. In other words, when we see people willing to give their lives for something, we pay attention. It grabs our attention. It moves our curiosity. And we have to think, what is it? What is it about their beliefs that makes it worth giving up their life? Like the debate today, there was a serious question in the past on policy. Is it society's responsibility to take care of the less fortunate? Well, people disagreed back then and people disagree today. But for Christians, it is clear. We follow Jesus, and Jesus took care of the less fortunate. At this point, this is all well and good, but what do we do now? Turn on any of the 3 big cable news networks, and you will find it to be a 24-hour blame game. We can spread plenty of blame around. But how do we solve this crisis? Some people think that this is like Katrina. Wright, like so many, only mentions New Orleans, forgetting about all of us who are affected on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Still others say we are at the end of times, that the rapture is going to come. This idea made famous or infamous in the Left Behind series written by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins, which I have read all 12 of those books, and they are fantastic works of fiction. Their basis for the story of the end times using Revelation and a lot of the prophet Daniel just doesn't really line up. Still, there's some who have a positive note on this. Some Christians see it as an opportunity for revival, where the church will be relevant again. Like we can go back to our thriving numbers in the days like the 1950s. Previewing the next chapter, Wright talks about the Old Testament. Remember, this book is a biblically rooted approach to the pandemic. And he quotes the minor prophet Amos and says, "Does disaster befall a city unless the Lord has done it?" Good question. Is it possible that these Old Testament writings from 3,000 years ago can help us find new ways to approach the pandemic in the 21st century? Good question. I will include a link to the workbook questions. I found them extremely helpful and helped me reflect and know more about my own response and feelings toward this pandemic. So that's chapter 1. We will do chapter 2 next Sunday, and I will see y'all then. Stay safe, and God bless you. Peace.